Debris heading towards our comm satellite. Impact may cut off communications with ground forces.
Launch avoidance maneuver. "20 kilometers in closing."
Collision averted, sir. All objects are accounted for.
Good job.
As he mentioned, the Chief Technology Officer for Air Combat Command. Just to frame you a little bit, we're about 80,000 to 120,000 individuals, airmen, civilians, contractors across the globe. We operate about 12 main operating bases. Think of that as a normal Air Force base that you may have seen. Vandenberg out in the California area is a close one. We operate the fighters and bombers basically for the entire Air Force as our core competency. So a lot of our core pieces, IT is an enabler for that, for mainly our command and control systems. So one thing I'll try to do throughout this is try to minimize the number of acronyms. Air Force vernacular, just like intelligence and a lot of other areas, we have a lot of acronyms. So if you have any questions or something is a little too cryptic, let me know.
And before you get started, your Twitter handle is?
ACC_CTO.
Thank you. So
you can, pretty prolific there. And as Alan mentioned, that's one of my kind of pushing things as a government entity. We don't necessarily share as much, and it's not intentional. It's just we get wrapped up into our day-to-day lives, day-to-day work inside the Air Force and the DoD space. And there's sometimes a little bit of a sensitivity, sometimes a hypersensitivity to sharing too much on the regular internet. But one of the things I've been pushing is how do you moderate, how do you get the word out? Because industry, academia is certainly a core piece of what we do. The general officer that I work for basically says there's not a single thing we deploy, not a single thing we operate without industry and academia's direct assistance on. So really the social media piece at Air Combat Command continues to grow, and I've tried to push that through my Twitter handle as well, to try to push that out and share and collaborate and really crowdsource ideas. People often think, well, you're in the fighters and bombers, that's really your core piece, but there's a lot of logistic support, there's a lot of IT and IT management, personnel, so we have a wide range. As we often say, if there's a job in the industry, it's probably somewhere inside of the Air Force. So we look for that kind of feedback of how we can improve operations, especially given the budget the way it is. Clean, efficient, IT-enabled operations is certainly the key of what we do.
Now, you mentioned to me that you are one of the few people inside the Air Force right now who's allowed to actually have your own device.
Yes, and so one of the things I'll talk about here is I've got the, I believe it was the first, if not the first, the second iPad and iPhone actually physically connected to the NIPRNet, to our internal unclassified network. Little bit of a coup in the sense that, again, we've been a BlackBerry society, pretty locked down, pretty restricted, and so we've actually got Android and iPhone platforms in a limited use pilot across Air Combat Command at a couple of our bases. So really our first foray into truly mobile computing, mobile devices, mobile smartphone utilization, and how we will operate differently. And so that's really one of the first things I was going to talk about here today, was that focus on mobility. So one thing I'm going to do real quick is just share the screen and give you a couple graphics here. Try not to make it a slideshow per se. How was that coming through?
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see here. So relatively busy slide, but really we focused on four main areas. The applications, the devices, improving how we connect, and then really our use cases. At the end of the day, our business is about operations, so it's really about the use cases and focus on people like the medical community, the flight line, the maintainers that are working on jets on the flight line that are disconnected from their normal wired connection, the executive that's traveling extensively across the globe and making sure they're always connected. And really the other big one is our aerial networks. So our whole fundamental premise of, if you've seen in the trade rags, Air Mobility Command, which is our tanker and airlift and the folks that really ship the thousands and thousands of airmen and other infantrymen and equipment across the globe, that disconnected aerial network and how we get 4G, SATCOM, satellite communications, and other capabilities on those platforms onto smart devices. So they actually have just bought 18,000 iPads for what they call electronic flight books to extend the mapping capability, the online mapping capability into the cockpit, much as what you see with the FAA. So really exciting stuff from that front. We're also focused very heavily on 4G. We've done a lot with WiMAX and Wi-Fi and traditional wired connectivity, but our real push is really on 4G and providing high-speed, low-latency connections for primarily those first responders and medical, and to some degree the aerial folks as well. Won't talk about the devices on the right. Those are, I think everybody's familiar with those. But at the top is really, at the end of the day, is driving applications that really meet warfighting needs. So whether it's just the plain social networking to answer a staff question, or it's to enable what we call active shooter. If you're familiar with Fort Hood, when the shooter got there, we were very disconnected across our first responders, cops, and that actually came out in a congressional report. And so we've been focused very heavily on extending ubiquitous access all the way down to the cop car and even to the cop that's running across the flight line or across the operational area. So pretty interesting stuff that we're doing to try to bring together and bring a ubiquitous network. We sometimes at home think of that, we kind of take it for granted on the internet, but internal to the Air Force, you have to make sure a lot more security capabilities are in place. And so 4G and WiMAX and those things have certainly had their challenges, but we're working through those.
Sorry, I just want to ask you a question about, can you go back to that slide for a second?
Sure.
When you look at all this, as you said, it's a fairly complicated slide. I mean, is this sort of your process flow when it comes to trying to, deal with new technologies and new information going out into the Air Force? I mean, is this essentially what you're looking at, these four areas? And I mean, which one comes first?
Right, absolutely. Well, really the first two things are the devices and connectivity, because without the underlying technology, enabling technology, you certainly can't get to the next step of applications and having true use cases. So we have been focused over the last 6 months. My pilot, the iPads and iPhones and Androids that we have are examples of that on the devices front. The next slide will actually show you what we're doing on the connectivity front, on both aerial blimps as well as Cessnas and light air aircraft, in connecting folks and providing that aerial network that may not always be there in deployed zones. So if you think about it, when you're in the desert, you certainly don't have cell towers propagated across your area of interest. And so even taking a Cessna or taking a blimp and putting 4G antennas on it and providing ubiquitous coverage across a range is something that I'll show in the next slide. The other two pieces are really, at the end of the day, what it's really about, it's not about devices and connectivity, it's about the applications and the use cases. So how do we deliver the operational applications that enable the specific use cases that we're trying to tackle? Medical, flight line maintenance, executives, and aerial, like I mentioned before, are really our core focus areas.
Thank you.
So this is an actual recent exercise. We did it about 8 months ago. Again, we took a surrogate aircraft. We put an air bridge on top. We took a blimp. You can see that here. We practiced through things like cell jamming, spectrum hopping, those things that are certainly critical in a deployed location. And then we provided reach back to very mobile forces in the Army and some Air Force personnel to provide a very much a roaming capability. So we actually got connectivity 200 miles off the coast, providing NGA mapping and NRO mapping through that aircraft to first responders. A very, very interesting exercise that was very successful. We certainly had some challenges, like we always do with exercises, but the core pieces that we were able to demonstrate showed that through a Humvee, through an air operations center, through a control center, we can provide that ubiquitous contact over conventional 4G, commercial 4G capabilities with some industry-specific implications and applications through the air bridges that we set up.
Are those communications encrypted or no?
Excuse me?
Or is that an encrypted communication or not?
It depended on the use case. In some cases, they were encrypted. One of the technologies that's also coming up, you may be familiar with a thing called Suite B. It's a commercial grade, commercial standard encryption that NSA has come up with for mobile devices primarily, and so that is one of the enablers. We use our normal encryption capabilities, and in some cases, especially when you're talking about connectivity to local forces, local armed, civil authorities, local cops, those kind of things. Those are just regular unencrypted links, but they are encrypted where they need to be and are open where they need to be. So it kind of runs the gamut.
Thank you.
Great question. So our other use case, this is an exercise that we're about to hold in about 2 months, and this is where Alan was talking about the first responders, local civil authorities, and trying to bring things together. And this is not the prettiest of slides because we're really new into this exercise. But if you look around the left, all of our normal kind of personnel. So in a situation like a Fort Hood, who do we need to connect? So in the left, our security forces, our fire departments, hospital, medics, civil engineers. On the bottom right, all of our state and local and federal agencies. And then our upper right is our local command and control and command post activities. All often with very disparate systems. Some may have land mobile radios, some may be using cellular technologies, some of them using different C2 command and control applications. And so our upcoming exercise, we're actually focusing purely on mobile and tablet technologies with the right level of encryption, geotagging, geolocation, integrated voice, and unified communications to really bring together all the way, again, from that cop that may be looking around a corner with the camera and putting voiceovers for the bad guy that's right around the corner and hooking that through that whole cycle. So not necessarily the technologies themselves are revolutionary because we're all using them in different ways, but the ability to link those seamlessly together is really what we're attempting to demonstrate. Putting that cellular phone on a map so that the desk officer at the cops sees where all of his forces are and can react depending on the active shooter scenario that's coming up in front of them. So pretty exciting stuff that we're knocking out. And this is from a local Air Force Base perspective, again, to address things like the Fort Hood incident.
Did any of this get tested last year with the earthquake in the Washington area?
Not this particular one. Pieces of it did. We have an emergency mass notification system that was utilized, but that is primarily an Air Force Base centric activity or system. So this is taking that to the next step of actually interacting with the local, state, and federal agencies. This is where we met several months ago was that earthquake and some of the responses. I think it really showed how people communicate differently than they did in their old days. For example, no one used, at least on Air Force bases, typically used their regular desk phones because they were outside their buildings. And then when the cellular networks went down, they went to texting and those kind of things to still communicate. So we still kept it very good, even though these weren't even government devices. The personnel themselves were very collaborative, all the way from, in our case, some New York entities all the way down to North Carolina. So we still kept command and control, interestingly enough, through the collaborative services and not the traditional TDM or plain old telephone systems that we historically have used inside the military. So I think that was one of our first true tests of the new ages in technology inside the Air Force Base.
But you also indicated to me when we spoke earlier in the week that it also presented a problem in that many of these people who were supposed to be getting emergency phone calls, like you said, those calls were going to their desk phone and they were not at their desk.
Right, and that's part of this scenario as well, is showing how we can, in essence, I'll call it multicast events, multicast geolocation, multicast messaging, and bring that seamless environment together. Again, like Fort Hood, we had a lot of point-to-point capabilities. So, hey, the cop on the line is getting shot at. He's making a call back to the desk clerk. That's getting rerouted to someone else. Not a very good situation when you have 50, 100, or 200 responders to a situation, all with different devices. And so we've shown in small instances, and this is probably the biggest instance, where we're bringing land mobile radios, cellular, desktop, emergency mass notification systems, our C2 systems, our mapping systems into one cohesive kind of picture for operators. So very, very interesting stuff. We hope to have that in late June, early July exercise. Again, a cross-service joint experiment that we're hoping to be successful with. Won't go into that one too much. So any other questions on, that was my main focus that I was going to go through on the emergency response and some of our joint exercises we've done with cellular technologies. Any questions on that front?
Does anyone have any questions yet? Not yet. So keep going.
Okay. The other one, as Alan mentioned, was really a new way of looking at our devices and our security models. This is something I've been a very strong proponent inside the Air Force on, and I think me and Alan are thinking the same way in this construct. But mobile is more than just mobile. It's not just the shiny device. It's truly enabling our mission operations. But one thing that's been critical is thinking differently about our security model. The old defense in depth, layered security, put firewalls, proxies, walls around all of our data, all around our systems. It's just not a tenable model when you get to literally millions of devices that are scattered across and typically connecting to the internet. And so you have to look at I think you have to look at the model differently. And so I've got a couple little points here. Primarily the first one is, it allows you to push more of your data to the back, push it more to the cloud, keep it off the local hard drives, which is one of our fundamental problems with desktops. You've probably heard of GSA or some of these other federal agencies. Luckily, the Air Force hasn't had this problem yet, but of a laptop getting stolen with 60 or 70 gigs worth of personal information on them. Well, imagine, if you will, if that device was much more thin in nature, in the sense that it was truly leveraging cloud technologies, and that's one of our fundamental concepts with our cellular approach. We also have taken a little bit different approach. It's not really a BYOD approach in the sense that it's a personally owned device, but allowing to separate the user space from the government space through the use of secure containers such as Good, Fixmo. There's other vendors out there, but looking at creating a box inside of the box. So a FIPS 140-2 certified data at rest encrypted container that holds all of the unclassified but protected information, but still allows application space to be used by the user for example, my Yahoo, my Facebook accounts, those kind of things. But I've now separated my data into truly personal space in a secure container space. So a little bit different construct, I think, than the BYOD piece, although somewhat aligned to those same constructs. Along the same line, sandboxing applications. Apple, I think, does this very well, but the whole idea of virtualizing and sandboxing and building walls between your applications to limit liability. So again, we're doing that with our unclassified but sensitive applications, is building a store so that we can protect them and wrap them, but still allow them to be on a device that has personal applications on them. Also, lightening the load, reduce the complexity, reduce the amount of data on the device. It kind of goes across all these streams because ultimately complexity drives holes. I'm also on a Cyber Vision 2025 team that the Air Force has stepped up as a scientific board to really look at what are our key issues in the cyberspace. And complexity, I think we all can understand, is certainly one of them. The less and less we understand about our environment, the more holes we create, simply for a lack of understanding. The other one, I think we have to look a little bit different about virtualization on mobile devices. And what I mean by that is, if I've got a virtual instance and it gets corrupted, or I detect malware, or I detect anything bad occurring, then why don't I just shut the device off, wipe the virtual instance, and restart myself? And so, with the lighter form factor, with the lighter amount of data on the device, those are all key drivers. I call it making the device dance. Make it where the adversary, even if they do get in, it's virtualized, it's killed, it's recreated, different IP address, different instance, different OS potentially, and it's much harder for the adversary to get in. And then the last is really one of my jokes is, Apple never wants to see you again until you buy another device. And so our desktop model is very much a application management, a direct managed device that we have. High manpower, overhead, lots of issues and challenges with keeping up a million device enterprise through that traditional desktop approach. Whereas the over-the-air approach that I'm sure you're all familiar with mobile device management is where we really see a key driver to help us reduce that management overhead and still maintain some configuration control of the end device themselves. So just real quickly, the 6 or 7 key tenets that we're going down. Probably the secure container space is one of the more unlike models that may be out there, although I think the banking and other industries are looking at very similar models themselves.
Well, so if you were to take like a 3 to 5 year sort of leap into the future, what do you see happening?
With respect to mobile security?
Well, whatever. Mobile security or some of the other issues that you just brought up.
Well, I definitely believe, especially in the Air Force space, mobility is where it's at. When you talk to anybody that's working in the Air Force, it's all about decisions. It's all about getting in front of the adversary's decision cycle. Well, how do you do that? Well, it's fundamentally about communication. It's fundamentally about touching that person that's going to make that call. So when you start tying in social media in our air operations centers, imagine, if you will, everybody connected, understanding the threads that are coming through with threats, the adversaries, and making reactions, crowdsourcing activities, understanding where the operations are had, but that also infers that we're always connected. We've always got access to the expert that can make that decision, which I think fundamentally is why the mobile technology has gotten so strong. There are so many things we can do with it, and it's so ubiquitous now. We've kind of taken it for granted in the first place. We're trying to make it taken for granted in a good way in the operational space, in the Air Force space. So connecting people together, using social media constructs that find the expert piece that sometimes we're not always there at, and bringing that environment into very one cohesive environment. Every year we get better. Every year we provide technology that helps out. So I would never say that we don't communicate well, because we are a very agile fighting machine, as evidenced by the wars and contingencies out there. But it's always about getting better and making better decisions, and really becoming more streamlined in how we act, especially with the budget issues that they are. I fundamentally think the whole mobile security model will change how we operate inside the Air Force in the next 5 years.
Does anyone have any questions for Bill? Yes? No? Yes? Pete, we have someone who's running a microphone out, so just give us a 1 second, all right? All right, so Bill, your first question is going to come. I don't know if you're going to hear it.
Yeah, you might be getting to this, so sorry if I'm jumping any guns. But in terms of workforce planning, how are you guys adapting to this new surge of, you need mobile application developers and kind of, the skill set that is required to be trained to fulfill these needs?
Did you get that?
Yeah, so
workforce planning.
Make sure I was but it was how are we adjusting the workforce to utilize these new mobile technologies? Is that inaccurate?
Yes, workforce planning and how you're adapting to that.
Well, I think there's 2 angles to that. One is, and I'll steal my boss's line, but how many of you have gone to Apple training, Apple iPhone training, or have gone to Android training? We almost take it for granted. We do take it for granted when we go and buy a device. I mean, for the most part, we built light apps. They're easy to use apps, and to some degree, they're almost single-focused apps, which is a good thing because it solves a business problem. We are trying to do that in our application space inside the Air Force as well, as when we build applications, is make them lighter, spiral them faster, and get them fielded quicker. The problem we often have is our acquisition cycle is focused on an 18 to 24-month cycle, which just is not realistic in the IT environment that we're in today. So we're trying to push that back a little bit and say, build lighter, build smaller, build it on mobile. It forces a different construct, and web-centric development in and of itself tends to drive a little bit different approach to problems in a easier to spiral process. So We haven't focused too much on the training yet because honestly, we are focused on the devices and infrastructure that I mentioned earlier. The application piece is really our next focus that we're right in the middle of as we speak. Hope to have some application store capabilities out there in the next 2 or 3 months in the Air Force, and then the whole development cycle and changing the way we develop is kind of part and parcel of that movement. So I wouldn't say we're there yet. I would say it's definitely on our radar. But my construct is we need to tell our developers to stop building such complex applications that we build today, segment them off, and build them towards mission needs and direct business issues, much like you see in the mobile space today.
Right, so we have another question from someone you might know, actually, Lewis Shepard.
Hi, Bill. I have a question.
Oh, okay. Hey.
How you doing? I have a
Lewis,
question.
can you speak up, please?
I have a question about, similar to the last question, Tom's question about your planning for a future which, if we keep our fingers crossed, is one in which you have a peacetime Air Force, but also one almost certainly in which you have much dramatically lower budgets. And how you see both the technical skill levels, so relation to the mobile question you just answered, of your workforce, but also the connection between your Air Force and your ACC workforce with broader society. I mean, is the military population going to benefit or suffer or have no impact whatsoever from any societal changes as a result of those two trends being much smaller and lower budgets?
No, great question, because I will tell you today the almighty dollar is driving us like you would not believe. These are literally the harshest budgetary times I've seen in my 20 years. So every single decision that we're doing, so even our mobile capabilities, and hopefully this addresses the technical question, our mobile front is fully aimed at that. So in some cases, like an executive leader, they've got a whole desktop. They literally have, our four-star general had 4 phones, all at different classification levels, 3 singular VTC suites, 4 to 5 desktops depending on what he needed at the time. And that complexity was, of course, propagated across a whole litany of folks across the command. And so
That just sounds scary.
oh, it is, and it honestly is not useful. And we've allowed that to happen through singular programs, and that's one of the things that we're doing within our unified communications construct, is trying to single those down. I call it getting rid of the single-use device. That desktop VTC ought to be part of our UC strategy. That cell phone needs to be part of this unified comm strategy, the desk phone. And you can start working those things out. I mean, we've done it in our personal life. We just haven't done it very well inside the military. So we are focused heavily on that construct. And honestly, like our 4-star general, he used to take literally binders and binders. I mean, just stacks of them, just stacks. And so with his iPad as a read book, basically marked up files, he has all of his decision material. He can write it up. He can collaborate. He can do all those things very quickly with a lot of agility at a much, much reduced price point that meets his needs. And whether that's an Android device or an iPad or whatever, it really, or a Slate, it really doesn't matter. It's just the ability to put all that information at his fingertips versus when he gets on a plane with 6-ring binders or 6 inches of binders, and when he lands, they're totally out of date. Now he doesn't have that problem. So again, that decision perspective is what he's focused on. But getting all of that infrastructure down literally to a tablet computing platform that meets all of his needs. Right. So in some ways, that makes it easier, I would argue. A lot of things we're doing is simplifying that desktop environment. One of my big soapbox issues is technology needs to simplify. It cannot make it more complex, especially in this environment. If it makes it more complex, then we should invest in it because it's not meeting the mission needs. The second question on the ACC with the broader society, I think you see a lot of good work in the social media front with the military departments, the Army, Army's got a very good G6, which has a lot of great Twitter information on it, on their IT efforts. It continues to grow. It continues to get fertilized. What I'm trying to do from my ACC CTO Twitter piece is take that one more step, not just the organizational information that's going out there, but make sure that industry understands what big acquisitions are going out there. All publicized, but not necessarily that everyone knows when they've been published. So again, trying to crowdsource ideas, get inputs from industry. I think the younger generation gets it. We already see those threads occurring across Air Combat Command. It's really, in our vernacular, the majors, lieutenant colonels, colonels, and general officers, and likewise the equivalent civilians that are having a little bit of trouble. And we get a little bit mired in the security issues. We get a little scared that we'll show too much, and so we're almost a little bit too hypersensitive. And so I think that needs to be ratcheted back so that we do share more, and we still need to share the appropriate levels of information for national security reasons, but we do need to focus on sharing more information.
Bill, we have one more question, then we're going to have to move on to our next speaker. So,
Hi, this is Nigel Cameron, a somewhat different kind of question. I work with a think tank in DC. How much actual practical collaboration do you have with people in the civilian agencies? I mean, you mentioned GSA, for example. I mean, are there occasions when you sit down and cross-fertilize with the CTO at GSA? That may be a yes or no question.
I didn't get out. Was it how much cross-fertilization we would do with the other federal
with the CTOs in the civilian agencies, for example, GSA, which you mentioned. I mean, is there effective cross-fertilization going on, not least so that the civilian agencies can learn from what DoD is doing?
Right. I think it's hit and miss. It's kind of the same social media front that we have inside the Air Force. I think it's absolutely an area, and that's why I literally take it to heart every night. I try to put something out there, and I try to put a spin that's got an Air Force piece on it. It's not always the case, but very collaborative with Casey Coleman and Sonny out at GSA. That's one good case that we are very collaborative with. I won't say that we are with several others, or with most of the federal agencies, and a lot of that is, I'll be honest, the kind of newness of the Air Force CTO positions. I was actually the first CTO created, my position was the first CTO created in the Air Force just a little over 3 years ago. Wow. And so just even understanding what a CTO is focused on inside the Air Force, I think is one of the first steps, but it is going well. I do think there needs to be more mechanisms, and that's why I take efforts like this very seriously to try to spread the word, make better connections, be more collaborative. You get the LinkedIn, you get the other social media opportunities, but we haven't fully embraced all of those media feeds yet. There is an Air Mobility Command CTO that's also out on Twitter. I would encourage you to, I think he's CTO to go is his handle. But again, grassroots, start small, scale fast, run like hell kind of construct. We're probably in the start small scale right now.
well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us today. This is fantastic, and I will be taking your speech and putting it together with all the other speakers today, ultimately on one website.
All right, very good. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Explain the unexplained.
With over 50 years of helping injured people, we've seen it all. Know your rights.